Hey, this is Wayne Cook, and you're listening to What's Bruin Show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, UCLA, UCLA, fight, fight, fight.
UCLA, you're listening to Brett Hundley and Company. What's Bruin?
Down here, it's our time.
We watched the game. Here's a tough contested three. Hanna buries it. Boom.
He passed the ball so much more.
In the face.
We're everyday Joes talking good UCLA talk.
Hey, boys.
How about these guys?
They got playmakers out there.
Jake.
I am rather hairy.
I love you.
Bill.
And where are the white women at?
I don't know fully what's going on.
Mike.
Careful, man. There's a beverage here, huh?
Well, hello and welcome to What's Bruin, the MallCAST. I'm your host, Jake Merrifield. I'm not at the mall. As you might be able to tell, there's no wonderful ambient background mall soundtrack. I'm driving in my car, and I'm driving my car running a couple errands before going home to pack for the flight to Phoenix for the UCLA versus Arizona football game that I am very excited for and also dreading terribly because of PTSD from trips and BBS from trips past. Now, if you're listening to this on the free preview, thank you very much. You can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/whatsbruinshow or whatsbruinshow.com, or on Substack, whatsbruin.substack.com. Patreon's $2 a month, Substack's a little more. Either one works for me, and you will get extra episodes like this MallCAST during the football season, and then other extra stuff in the off season. But every little bit helps support this little floating pirate ship in the great waters of Bruin Sports Talk. I do want to welcome Kyle aboard. He's the newest subscriber to the Patreon, so thank you very much, Kyle. We appreciate your support. And anyone else out there, thank you in advance. Now, the little errand I'm on is actually an errand of frustration, as I don't know if I'd qualify, I don't know if I could get diagnosed with OCD, although after hearing the story, many of you might say, oh yeah, that's what you got, bud. But I certainly am a man of habits, and if I can control keeping my habit in place, then I do. So I got out of work early to drive home because my flight is, it's not for another 4 hours. So that's why I was trying to squeeze in a podcast here for you guys. And on my way home, my first stop, every lunch hour, my first stop is at In-N-Out to get a nice big Diet Coke. That should come as no surprise to many of you. As you know, I am a connoisseur of all things fountain drink, especially Diet Cokes. And I have a number of local In-N-Outs in the area on which I'm on a first-name basis with at least 40% of their employees. So I'll go in and buy my cup and then have some chit-chat with my friends, so to speak. Well, on my way home, I stopped at the one closest to my house and was very, very disappointed to discover that the mix today was a little honked up because sometimes somebody in the back will accidentally plug in a big box of Coke syrup into the Diet Coke slot, run it for a minute, and then before they realize their mistake, well, it's already polluted. And by the time they get the box switched, well, that soda's going to be contaminated for at least probably half a day. And it's really is a shame because although when I was a youth, or a ute, as we like to say, I did like a nice sugary soda in my old age, and really since I graduated college, it's like all diet for me. And Diet Coke is my preferred soft drink, of course. So as soon as I see that thing pouring into the cup, I can tell there's something off. And then, of course, when I taste it, yeah, you get the sugary aftertaste that I am not looking for. And then I have to go and tell the guys to switch it. But by that point, it's unsalvageable, at least for now. That In-N-Out is off limits for at least half a day for me. And for my purposes, I'm flying to Arizona. So that In-N-Out's not going to be good for me until I get home. So knowing that I have a few hours to play with, and knowing that I had to record this, not had to, but I wanted to record a little pod for you guys anyway, take the opportunity to drive to my other local In-N-Out, which is, 10 minutes down the road. And hopefully, tragedy will not strike twice. Except for I might get into a car accident because guys pull into the turning lane ahead of me. We'll see how this sorts out. Yeah, buddy, you can't be here. Go somewhere else. But I'm about to pull in right now, and I'll step away for a moment and come back with the results. But yeah, I'll fill up my cup here and then go home and pack. hopefully publish this by the time it's done, and then get on the road. So I will be right back, hopefully with better results on the soda front. All right, I'm back in the car, and let me tell you, tragedy is averted, and the fountain tastes real nice. That's generally the thing about In-N-Out, is that they're almost always very reliable. What's the expression? Like 99% of the time, they're 100% reliable. But anywho, I have my Diet Coke now, and now I can get on my flight in peace. Now it's time to go home and pack. But I did want to hop on here for a minute and just discuss a few of the things that are in my mind going to Tucson once again. The last time I was there, I don't remember the last time I was there, but I do believe, like I said, I'm like 1 and 2 there or 1 and 3 there. One of the trips, and the most famous trip in What's Bruin lore, was truly a What's Bruin trip. Bill and I, plus our friend P, Sergeant P now, all drove out there together in a minivan. And this was when the Bruins were 8-0. I think this is true, but I believe this is the year that Bill and Suzanne got married. So we had actually missed a UCLA home game for their nuptials, which I always give Bill a hard time for, but I mean, whatever. That's how it goes. It was a nice wedding, and they had the UCLA band play there. Didn't they? I think they did. Does it make sense that they'd have the band play there on a game day? I don't know. I don't remember. But I mean, it was very UCLA themed if they did or didn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm conflating it with Mike and Alicia's wedding just this last couple of years, where I did, in fact, have to witness The Spirit of Troy playing, which was, talk about PTSD. But anywho, it was a big family road trip, couples road trip, I should say. My wife, Sarah, and I, Bill and Suzanne, Sergeant P and his lovely wife, Diana, we all packed into a rented minivan and drove out to Tucson with the Bruins riding high, 8-0, ready to beat the Wildcats right before leading into an epic showdown with the Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart et al. Trojans. And of course, as always happens, when going into an Arizona game, the Bruins ran right into a brick wall, got murdered on the road. I felt like it was, I don't remember the score right now, I'm driving, but it was, like 40s or 50s to single digits. Just absolutely one of the most terrible Bruin games of all time, considering how good they had been playing and the stakes and all that. And that was a team, if you remember, one of the wonderful, exciting things about that team was every game came down to the last play, it seemed like, and they were just so clutch. But not in that game. There was no room for clutch because they just got curb stomped. But just a miserable time in that stupid Wildcat Stadium. And we came home very, very sad. At that point, me and Bill and Suzanne had been involved in many, many very sad Bruin road games. We went to Notre Dame, that would have been after that game. We went to the Silicon Valley Classic against Fresno State, where we got barked at like dogs, and that almost caused Bill and Suzanne to break up. They were fighting so much just because of the circumstances. We went to the Emerald Nut Bowl, where the Bruins lost to Florida State in embarrassing fashion, both teams on the same sideline, if I remember right, in that game. And then we got stuck on the 5 freeway heading south of the Grapevine for like 6 hours in some sort of blizzard activity. I don't quite remember the weather circumstance, but I just remember we were delayed greatly. And all of these things happened within like a 4-year period. So, I mean, if you want to talk about why the What's Bruin show feels cursed in road games, or why Bruin fans feel so battered, BBS and all that, I mean, it was all because of the early 2000s and all of those trips. Those were just so horrible and terrible. But the great thing in particular about the Arizona trip specifically was we drive out there, have a good time up until the game starts, and we have a terrible time. Leave with our tails between our legs. And then we get into the van and we drive home, and Bill and Suzanne are right in the back. That's an 8-hour road trip, right? And by the way, they'll still give me shit for picking to drive on the 60 instead of the 10 or vice versa. I don't remember what it was. Back then, I don't remember how prevalent. We didn't have like MapQuest. I think we just had like a GPS device or something that you'd like strap to your dashboard. But they were giving me shit about that. Maybe cost them an extra 20 minutes. They still will never forget that crap. But the most wonderful part of the trip was Bill spent the entire ride back complaining about how uncomfortable the ride was. And I don't remember why it didn't happen on the way there, but it probably was because Phil and Diana sat in the back seat or something like that. But Bill complained about how uncomfortable his seat was because it was like pretty much at a right angle in the back. And I think he just assumed because it was the very rear seat that it didn't work properly, or that it didn't adjust. So 8 hours of Bill bitching about feeling uncomfortable and complaining and yada, yada, yada. And then, like, as soon as we pulled into our driveway and everybody gets out of the car, Phil hops into the back and is like, pulls the little handle on the side of the seat and adjusts the seat back. We're dying in laughter. And Bill was just like, put his hands to the sky in a what can I do sort of gesture and sheepishly went home. But that was the one silver lining to that trip out to the desert that ended in misery, right? And there was another trip I went out there, just me and Phil, and I think the only road trip I ever took with my father, the late, great John Leslie Merrifield Jr. And I don't remember too much about the trip other than feeling like it was a game we all had in the bag because apparently I hadn't learned my lesson by then. And then afterwards coming home and just saying to Sergeant P and my dad that we're never doing this again. Never again. But here we are on the eve of not on the eve. I'm literally getting on a plane in like an hour. So apparently I haven't learned my lesson. But we all know the real reason we're going out there is because our good friend Jamaal moved out there over the summer. And this was earmarked as a trip that we would have to take, as his loyal friends. And of course, loyal friends, I mean me and Mike, not Bill. As far as this game goes, I'm really still terrified about them being a 3-point favorite. To kind of expand on what I was talking about, as far as like, will the combination of the Arizona offense and defense being competent enough be enough to overcome the Bruins up to this point herky-jerky offense and their terrific defense? Oregon State proved that the balance was the way to really get some plays on this UCLA defense. And Arizona's certainly shown that potential. But they have to be like a minimum rating to be able to exploit that, I think. So, like, if we're talking like, if we're like in Madden and their offense, and let's look at like Colorado and Stanford. Colorado, Stanford's offense, let's say it's like a 72 overall, and their offensive line might have been like a 75, and their skill positions might have been like a 63. You add it all together, and it couldn't match the Bruin defense head-to-head in all the matchups, individual matchups. Colorado had like a 91 in the skill positions, but like a 52 in the offensive line, and that meant that the Bruin defense wasn't going to have any of it, and they could do nothing against the Bruin defense, right? Because the Bruin defense was just overwhelming. You look at Oregon, and they're like a 85 in the run game, skill positions, quarterback, offensive line, the whole way around, and that was good enough all the way around to give the Bruin defense some problems. And so I'm looking at Arizona, I'm like, well, are they quite as good as Oregon State? Are they more like a 78 or an 82 or a little bit better, 86, 87? I know these are complete arbitrary numbers. I'm just pulling out of my butt to kind of use to measure one against the other. They're certainly better than both Stanford and Colorado, more competent, right, overall. But you still have to match up with the very tough matchups the Bruins present up front. So if they can manage to do that, then, yeah, I think they're going to give the Bruins some problems, and the Bruin offense is definitely going to have to score a few more points. But if not, it may just be kind of academic, and the Bruins just have to not hand Arizona points like they tried to do against Colorado. And I really feel like the offense, at least, will be a little more steady in that regard. Maybe they aren't explosive, maybe they don't score a bunch of points, but I'm hoping that the turnover luck kind of balances out a little bit. On the flip side, you look at the Arizona defense versus the UCLA offense, and it's like you're hoping, number one, I said it earlier, but that the UCLA just settles down with the turnovers. I mean, and I think you could make, at least for the fumbles, I don't think we're going to see that again, how that happened. But they have to stop shooting themselves in the foot, and it feels like they will, but at the same time, they've averaged 2 a game pretty much the entire season. So it's like, why are we really believing that they won't? Because they're finding ways to do it. So maybe that's just a characteristic of this particular group, and the luck isn't going to even out. But, hope springs eternal, I guess, right? And so just looking at, they make the change from the more volatile Moore to the less volatile Ethan, and you would think that would, to a degree, solve some of the interception problems, although it didn't against Colorado. But I don't see Travis Hunter out there for the Wildcats. And then you had the 2 fumbles in the game, but I really think you can kind of squint your eyes and think about how good a hits those were and how perfect they were and how, still coughed it up, just not, it wasn't a clumsy turnover. It was, he got popped. But you hope those will go away. and you think that maybe Arizona might be vulnerable. Like they have a pretty darn good rushing defense statistically so far, but you wonder how many running teams they've actually gone up against. And I really am curious. I would really love the Bruins to really test that out, because I think that's where the strength of the Bruin offense lies, and you might as well exhaust that first before you start messing around with what has been your weakness, which is the ability to get the ball down the field reliably without throwing it into the other team's hands. And also, like, they haven't really been able to generate the explosive plays down the field like they have in years past, just in spurts and starts. That's why I kind of called them kind of herky-jerky. And then you look at Arizona, and seemingly they do have a pretty not too great of a pass defense. But then when you look at the teams that they've played, they've played Washington, Southern Cal, and Washington State already, and they annihilated Washington State. But you don't expect them to be able to stop those offenses. So it's like, of course, their pass defense is going to look a little bit suspect with the level of competition that they've played so far. And I do know that defense, they have, their safeties are kind of but their corners are big and strong and physical. And so that allows them to be a little more aggressive, kind of in the same way that the UCLA defense is aggressive because of how great its front seven is. Well, they kind of are taking their strength from the other side of it, in that they have two big, strong physical corners, and they're allocating the rest of their defense to different areas and kind of leaving those guys on their own a little bit. And then you have guys like Justin Flo out there who's running around like a freaking missile trying to stop the run, but he's an absolute train wreck when it comes to covering people. So ideally, I'm hoping that UCLA doesn't try to force things through the air like they have in so many games this season. And I understand why they did it, or why they were thinking that way, because of how good, Moore looked early. And then when you get into conference play, it's like, you're trying to get that started. And I guess, but when it's bit you so many times, hopefully they kind of reconfigure that thinking and go more to, really, we said it on the show earlier in the week, but go more to establishing the fact that you can run the ball really well first, because you can, and then get Justin Flo confused and have him trying to tackle Carson Steele and TJ Harden and whoever running out of the backfield. And that's when you take advantage of the passing plays down the field. And hopefully you get the ball into your playmakers' hands like Ford and Sturdivant and all that stuff, and you can actually make some hay that way. But I know it's old-fashioned, but if you have a defense that is absolutely unbelievably elite and all your questions reside on the offensive end, then pretend you're Alabama from 2009, right? They had the best defense in the country pretty much. They had the second best defense in the country, but the 50th best offense. That's kind of where UCLA is right now, like literally, right? Top 10 offense, and you're just hoping for an offense that's not killing you. Obviously, I think we want more than top 50, right? Definitely, top 30 would be preferable. But isn't that insane to think of where we're at from what we were asking, 6 months ago? Coming off a Bruin offense that was top 10, just begging for a top 50 defense. And it turns out, oh, gee whiz, you need the inverse of that. It's insane. College football is nuts. It's bonkers. It's silly. It's stupid. It's crazy. All right, one last thing before I get out of here, and that is I did notice a fun statistical anomaly that I want to point out to you guys, and it didn't make the show because we were busy with other things. I was trying to reckon with Mike being on the phone, which is never ideal. I hate doing podcasts on the phone, but it is what it is. You got to do what you got to do, right? It's Halloween week, whatever. But I was looking at Bill Connolly's win expectancy stats, and those are the post-game ones. So it means like after the game is played and all the stats are in, he looks at the numbers and his computer spits out the percentage that your team would win if they had those stats in a normal game, right? All things being equal, those stats would generally lead to a win this percentage of the time. And just looking at the contenders in the Pac-12, I found some fun things from those stats. And that is, number one, Washington, no surprise. They have 4 games in which they were 100% winners statistically. They had 6 games in which they were 91%, and all 8 of their games were above 77% statistically, right? So that means that all 8 of their games, their statistics were so overwhelming that they would have won the game if it were played, 100 times. They'd win it 77 times out of 100, at least. And like I said, 4 of them were hundreds. Next best in that category, believe it or not, is UCLA. UCLA has 6 games, surprisingly enough, the wins, in which they were a 90% win expectancy or better. And that's with 4 hundreds. And of course, the Utah one was like, they were like a 47%, because remember how coin flippy that game was? And then the Oregon State game, they really got their ass kicked. They were like under 1%. Like, I don't understand quite how that number spits out, but that's what it was, and there it is. Oregon State, right with the Bruins, had 5 games in which they were over 98% dominant in the stats. Oregon, which we all think is probably the best team in the Pac-12, even though they lost to Washington, they have 6 games over 99%. So Washington was 4 games at 100. Oregon has 6 games above 99%. And the only game they were below 70 was the Washington game, in which it was a 22%. So they kind of profile kind of like the Bruins have this year, in that they've pretty much dominated all their wins except for their one loss. Let's go to Utah next. Utah has 2 games in the 90s, 2 games in the 70s, 2 games in the 50s. One of those is the UCLA game, and 2 below 1%. Obviously, one of those was this one last week where they got killed by the Ducks. Washington State, their first 4 were above 76%, and their last 4 were under 7%. That shows how much statistically things have changed for the old Cougs. And then finally, SC. Their first 5 games all were 95% or over in the win expectancy, but the last 4 have all been under 52%. So that's the Notre Dame loss, the Utah loss, all those things. So, what do those mean? It doesn't mean that much. It's basically backseat driving it after the game, right? Just saying, well, normally it's something to make losers feel better, really. It's like after the game and you had a close loss, you're like, well, you know what? The stats really do, it'd say that we played a better game than we thought we did. Or it's like, wow, that really was embarrassing. We absolutely had no chance to win that game. I suggest Colorado look at the stats for that. It does not acquit you guys very well. Actually, I didn't say what Colorado is. What is Colorado? All right, pulling up our wonderful Colorado Sway, Colorado Buffs. Their first 3 games, you wouldn't be surprised, are all over 60%. Their game against Oregon, 0.0. Their game against USC, 4.3. But remember, they almost came back to win that game unexpectedly. They actually haven't been as bad as I thought. But against the Bruins, 3.1% win expectancy based on those stats you put out there. So yes, UCLA helped you with the 4 turnovers, but it still didn't mean a lick. You guys were getting dominated in that game. No sour grapes at all for me whatsoever. All right, I'm going to turn this off, publish it, get on the plane, and hopefully I will do a post-game show with Jamaal at least after the game. Give us your calls, please. Call into the hotline. You all know the number. And until next time, a very timid and questioning Go Bruins in Tucson.
Good evening.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
That was the What's Bruin Show.
Try us tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel.
It's gotta be in or out, Mom. In or out. Well, I need the door closed.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Dude, bro, we play some ball on the West Coast.
The final word is boob.